You know, when we picture the end of the world, or at least the end of society as we know it, we've basically been culturally conditioned to expect a very specific kind of monster.
Oh, absolutely. Like the classic zombies.
Right. Whether it's movies, video games, comic books, whatever. We've been sold this comforting lie of the slow, shuffling, moaning horde. We expect mindless decay.
Yeah, you look out your window, you see a mob of the undead aimlessly wandering the streets, and you know exactly what you're dealing with. It's terrifying, sure, but it's also um, remarkably predictable.
Exactly. It's almost cozy in a weird way.
Well, the appeal of that specific prop culture monster is that it represents a binary threat. It's humanity versus a brainless, rotting force of nature.
Right, there's no talking your way out of it.
No negotiation, obviously, but crucially, there's also no deception. The threat is entirely straightforward. You can outrun it, you can outsmart it, you can build a wall to keep it out.
But what if the collapse of the social contract doesn't turn us into wandering, brain-dead monsters? What if instead it turns us into something far more intelligent, far more organized, and honestly, a whole lot closer to home?
That is the terrifying premise we're looking at today.
Yeah. Today, for you listening, we're taking a deep dive into an incredibly dense and just highly unusual piece of digital source material. It was published just today, actually, June 27, 2026.
Fresh off the digital press.
Yeah, it's an article from a web publication called Bye 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 Magazine. I think it's trademarked, actually. And the specific text is labeled as a systemic diagnostic. It carries this rather imposing title, Active Archetype, Rodent Colony Matrix.
Which is quite a mouthful.
It really is. So our mission for this deep dive is to decode this complex, jargon-heavy framework, right? We're going to treat it as a captivating thought experiment about societal collapse and the severe behavioral shifts that, come with it.
It's definitely a dense read.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where exactly does a diagnostic like this even begin its argument? Because it's a lot to take in.
It establishes its core premise right in the opening lines, actually, by issuing what the author calls a migration notice.
A migration notice, like software.
Kind of, yeah. It's presented as a formal evolution in how we need to model systemic collapse. The text is essentially putting out this advisory that the old way we conceptualize societal breakdown is fundamentally obsolete.
Like it just doesn't work anymore.
Right. We have to migrate our analytical models to a completely new behavioral infrastructure. And to do that, the document explicitly deprecates the old model of the zombie apocalypse. It goes so far as to classify the traditional zombie framework as anatomically restricted.
Anatomically restricted. Wow. That implies the old monster was physically incapable of posing a true evolving threat.
Exactly. The source argues that systemic erosion simply does not produce necrosis. And, necrosis implies dead tissue, mindless decay, chaotic, aimless wandering.
Right, the typical zombie stuff.
Yeah. But the argument here is that when complex modern social contracts collapse, human beings don't just rot and stumble around. The human architecture undergoes a forced cognitive regression.
Cognitive regression, meaning we go backward.
We drop directly down into our shared mammalian survival vectors. That's the foundational reason the rodent colony matrix replaces the zombie framework. We don't become the walking dead. Humanity regresses into a highly functional rodent colony.
Okay, I have to jump in here and push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Because I struggle to buy this entirely cynical premise.
Huh.
Historically, when we look at actual natural disasters like earthquakes, hurricanes, localized grid failures, humans actually tend to cooperate.
They do, yeah.
We band together, we share limited resources, we build impromptu communities to help the vulnerable. So why does this diagnostic assume our baseline mammalian trait is inherently predatory and isolated rather than, cooperative?
That is a crucial distinction to make, and it really comes down to the specific parameters the author is establishing around the phrase systemic erosion. A natural disaster is an acute disruption. It's sudden. And people generally believe that help is eventually coming, right? Which fosters that beautiful cooperative spirit you mentioned.
Oh, the cavalry is on the way.
Exactly. Systemic erosion, however, is a protracted, slow burn collapse. It's a state where the social contract isn't just temporarily disrupted, it's entirely exhausted over a long period.
Oh, I see.
Trust in institutions, supply chains, even your neighbors, it's slowly bled out. When that hope for external rescue vanishes completely, the survival math changes.
So it's basically the difference between surviving until the weekend versus surviving for the rest of your life.
What's fascinating here is the psychological distinction the author is making about that long-term survival state. Under this new model, we are dealing with functional predatory regression.
Functional and predatory. That's a scary combination.
The phrase the text uses is asymmetric covert optimization. So it's a society completely driven by utility and calorie conservation. It's not a mindless panic. It's a calculated adaptation to an environment where resources are permanently finite.
Which completely flips that pop culture view of collapse on its head. I mean, think about it through this analogy for a second. If the old zombie model was like a broken, malfunctioning Roomba,
A Roomba.
yeah, like just aimlessly bumping into walls in your living room, completely predictable, right? Following a degraded algorithm until its battery finally dies, this new rodent model is like a highly coordinated network of ants finding sugar in your kitchen.
The mechanics of that analogy actually map perfectly to the document's thesis.
Yeah.
The Roomba is incapable of learning. It just repeatedly strikes the same physical barrier. A network of ants, however, finds the microscopic fracture in your baseboard.
Right. They find the weak spot.
They map the fastest, most secure route to the calorie source, and then they use chemical signals to communicate that exact route to the rest of the colony. They exploit the architecture of your house against you. It is a purely functional, predatory, and hyper-efficient system.
So for you listening right now, consider how this shifts your own perspective on disaster preparedness. We spend so much cultural energy fearing mindless chaos, the panicked mob, the unthinking riot.
Prepping for the wrong thing.
Exactly. This diagnostic suggests you shouldn't be prepping for chaos at all. You need to anticipate calculated, predatory survivalism. You aren't going to be dealing with people who have lost their minds. You're going to be dealing with people who have optimized their regression.
And because the fundamental behavior of this collapsed society has shifted from mindless chaos to calculated optimization, the terminology we use to track and study it must also evolve.
The language shift.
The document mandates a series of specific taxonomic corrections to update our threat parameters. It argues that old language leaves us vulnerable.
The language shift here is incredibly intense. It feels less like sociology and more like, I don't know, reading a military intelligence briefing.
It really does.
Like the first correction mandates that what we used to call the horde must now be reclassified as foraging aggregations.
Look at the sociological function of that linguistic shift, though. A horde implies an emotional, overwhelming mass of bodies driven by blind rage or hunger. The term carries this cinematic weight.
Yeah, very dramatic.
A foraging aggregation, on the other hand, is a fluid, predatory network that only assembles around localized scarcity windows.
Which is such a chilling phrase.
It strips the emotion away completely. It describes a temporary convergence of biological assets seeking calories, which deliberately dissipates the moment the resource is exhausted or if the risk outweighs the reward.
The clinical detachment of that phrasing is just wild to me. Describing starving people looking for food as a localized scarcity window completely masks the visceral, bloody reality of survival. It turns a desperate street riot into cold math.
But that clinical detachment serves a very specific purpose for the colony's operation. When you remove the humanity from your targets, they become mere resources, which leads directly into the next taxonomic correction.
Right, the second one.
What used to be termed feral violence is now officially corrected to asymmetric sabotage.
Which is a huge leap. We go from imagining unhinged survivors swinging baseball bats in the street, operating on pure adrenaline, to imagining high-risk shadow operations aimed at neutralizing or harvesting outsiders.
Harvesting outsider.
Yeah, the text specifically uses the phrase harvesting outsiders. It isn't a fight born of sudden rage. It's an extraction operation. It's an assassination or a heist, executed with covert precision to minimize calorie expenditure while maximizing the return.
Violence in this matrix is no longer expressive. It is entirely instrumental. You do not attack to intimidate or to express dominance. You attack solely to acquire.
Purely practical.
And this shift from expressive to instrumental action fundamentally changes the spatial dynamics of the environment, which brings us to the final taxonomic correction. What we previously called dead zones, the abandoned, ruined parts of a collapsed city, are now classified as colony perimeters.
The phrase dead zone sounds inherently safe, It implies an absence of life, a place where nobody is home. But reclassifying those areas as colony perimeters means those repurposed structural ruins and dark corridors are actively serving as territorial hunting blinds. You aren't walking into an empty, tragic wasteland. You are crossing an invisible tripwire.
And if these colonies are treating their environment like an active hunting ground, they aren't merely going to sit in the ruins and wait for someone to wander by.
Mm.
A highly optimized mammalian system will actively set traps.
This is where it gets really dark.
It brings us to the most complex section of the diagnostic, the advanced exploitation layer. This regressed baseline of humanity utilizes deeply sophisticated behavioral traps to acquire resources.
Yeah, the source breaks down 3 specific behavioral traps, and the first one is detailed as predatory baiting.
Predatory baiting involves deliberately exposing contained resource caches to draw in unaligned assets.
It's like leaving out cheese for a mouse.
Essentially, the colony will place something universally valuable out in the open bottled water, antibiotics, maybe a functioning generator. When an outsider approaches to claim that resource, the colony does not simply kill them to protect the bait.
And they don't just steal the outsider's gear either.
No. The document specifically notes the primary goal is total labor extraction.
Which is horrifying. They aren't just stealing your backpack. They are capturing you to force your physical labor into the service of the colony.
Right.
In a collapsed world where electrical grids and combustion engines have completely failed, human caloric labor becomes the only renewable engine. It's a localized, predatory economy built on forced extraction.
It's brutal efficiency.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The second behavioral trap. The diagnostic calls this institutional camouflage.
This is perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated concept in the entire document. It delves deeply into the mechanics of human cognitive load and heuristics.
The text asserts that this rodent colony matrix maintains empty brands, historical corporate insignias, and dead-world governance logos.
Right.
They weaponize these hollowed-out fronts to disarm target defenses through knee-jerk psychological conditioning. It's like a hermit crab using a discarded soda can for protective shell.
That's a great way to picture it.
The colony finds the ghost of a dead, highly trusted corporation, hollows it out, and climbs inside to trick people.
To understand how devastatingly effective this would be, we have to look at the psychology of heuristics. During a systemic collapse, a person's cognitive load is maxed out simply trying to survive day to day.
Oh yeah, you'd be exhausted.
The human brain burns an immense amount of energy under chronic stress. So to conserve calories, it relies on established mental shortcuts.
Right.
We've been conditioned for decades to trust specific symbols.
We really have.
We see a delivery van with a familiar smiling arrow logo, or a clinic with a red cross, or an official-looking municipal seal on a clipboard, and our threat detection defenses naturally lower. Our brains have hardwired those symbols to mean service, help, or authority.
And the colony understands the evolutionary energy-saving mechanism and weaponizes it. They wear the logo like camouflage, specifically to bypass your critical thinking.
Exactly.
I mean, why expend the energy to aggressively kick down a heavily fortified door when you can just wear a fake utility worker uniform and have the exhausted, terrified target voluntarily unlock the deadbolt for you?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the third trap outlines the true, terrifying scale of this system. It is labeled International Parasitic Networks.
The global scale.
The document explicitly states that these extraction operations scale across fractured borders, exploiting old, dormant distribution channels. This completely shatters the idea that a collapsed world is a disconnected world.
So globalization actually survives the apocalypse?
In a way, yes.
Instead of a global network distributing smartphones and flat-screen TVs, it becomes this decentralized shadow network distributing harvested resources and extracted human labor across the ruins of old international borders.
It implies the existence of a massive, coordinated ecosystem built entirely on the infrastructure of the old world. It is a dark mirror of our current supply chains, operating with the same logistical efficiency, but driven by a completely parasitic moral framework.
Wow. Okay, looking at the sheer mechanical depth of this rodent matrix, we need to zoom out and examine the architecture of the text itself. Like, who actually conceptualized this chilling framework?
That's where things get very meta.
Yeah, because the metadata, the author bio, and the context surrounding this article blur the lines between reality and fiction in a way that is just incredibly disorienting.
The diagnostic architect is listed as Dr. Melvin Sewell, who carries both a Master of Science and a Ph.D.
Okay, sounds legitimate.
He is cited as the academic dean of the Cosmic University of Echo Rift Studies 9.
Wait, what?
Right. But he's simultaneously listed as the CEO of a real-world entity called TrueFlow Games.
The network of links and affiliations on this single page is a dizzying labyrinth. You have legitimate, real-world internet infrastructure like links to GitHub repositories, Zenodo Canon, and verified ORCD academic profiles, sitting right next to completely fictional world-building elements like sovereign diagnostics.
It's all mashed together.
The site itself is powered by a standard web host, Webador, and the copyright belongs to a character named Saiku Venga and the Echo Rift Archive, alongside Bye Bye Beeb Studio. It's a lot.
It is a lot, and it's paramount that we address the sovereign diagnostic disclaimer located at the footer of the source. Throughout this deep dive, we've been discussing highly charged, academic-sounding concepts, ritualized containment, actor convergence, and systemic erosion.
Which all sound very political.
They do. However, the disclaimer explicitly states that this site and its contents are not affiliated with any actual government, political party, intelligence agency, or activist group.
Meaning, we're looking at this purely as an elaborate thought experiment, exactly through the lens the author provides. No real-world politics here.
Exactly. Our role here is to maintain strict impartiality. The author describes all of these materials as a mythic infrastructure, a cinematic indictment, and a sovereign broadcast.
Got it.
These terms clarify that the text is designed as a diagnostic tool and a piece of speculative world building. It is not an endorsement of any real-world political ideology, nor is it a critique of current institutions. We are treating the Rodent Colony Matrix strictly as an intricate piece of cinematic interactive fiction.
Which brings up a jarring narrative pivot that happens right at the very end of the text. After absorbing all of this clinical, ecological breakdown of mammalian survival vectors and parasitic exploitation layers, the document concludes with this single line. It says, Chapter 1 Origin, Saiku Venga emerges from the rift born between slipflow and counterflow, marked by SH1 resonance.
Such a shift in tone.
Right. How does a sudden burst of sci-fi cyberpunk narrative recontextualize the incredibly dry academic diagnostic we just spent all this time analyzing?
This raises an important question about how modern media is actively blurring the boundaries between academic theory, alternate reality gaming, and mythic storytelling.
It really is blurring those lines.
By framing a heavily stylized cyberpunk narrative, the emergence of a character from a dimensional rift within the rigid, uncompromising structure of a systemic diagnostic, the author is performing a fascinating psychological trick on the reader.
Because the aesthetics of authority completely bypass our critical filters. When we read a text formatted with academic syntax, complete with taxonomies and ORCD IDs, our brain instinctively codes it as credible.
It grounds the fiction in reality. The world of the story feels terrifyingly plausible because the sociology and the behavioral models holding it up are so meticulously constructed. You aren't just passively reading a story about a post-apocalyptic society.
No, you're being handed the operational manual for how the underlying physics of that society actually function. So what does this all mean? If we step away from the cosmic university and the echo rift, what is the core takeaway for you listening right now? I think this text forces a total paradigm shift in how we view the fragility of human systems.
It really does challenge those old assumptions.
The old comforting fear was that if society broke down, we would become lesser mindless, chaotic, shuffling monsters, wandering aimlessly until we withered away. But the Rodent Colony Matrix suggests the real terror is that we would not lose our intelligence at all.
We'd keep it.
We would simply hyper-focus it, stripping away empathy to optimize purely for extraction and survival.
Humanity would adapt by becoming a hyper-efficient predatory organism, a decentralized colony utilizing the hollowed-out shells of our current world to survive. Which leads to a final thought I want you to take with you, something to genuinely mull over the next time you walk through your neighborhood or run an errand. Look closely at the corporate logos, the delivery trucks, the utility uniforms, and the familiar institutions you interact with without a second thought. If our society were to ever undergo the kind of systemic erosion Dr. Sewell describes, which of the trusted symbols in your own life would serve as the most effective institutional camouflage?
Ooh, that's a creepy thought.
Which familiar logo would prompt you to bypass all your defenses and simply open your front door? Because in the reality of the Rodent Colony Matrix, the true threat isn't a mindless monster moaning outside your window. It is the polite, perfectly organized delivery driver pulling into your driveway, wearing a logo you trust, ready to extract everything you have.